Everybody, I'm Skip Alsheimer. Welcome to the AV Geeks lunchtime streaming show, where it looks like my camera is beginning to fritz out a little bit. I'm not sure what's going on. Anyways, that was Let's Go Fishing. There was supposedly a soundtrack with that, but I couldn't find it. And chances are it was started with a soundtrack and then it was released silently for the home market. Yeah. Anyways, how's everybody doing? I was on a brief vacation this weekend and was driving back through Hardee's Country, the chain that I showed entirely too many commercials of yesterday, which was based in Rocky Mount initially. Well, it kind of started in Greenville, but then the official chain store. First one was in Rocky Mount, so I was kind of around that area coming back from the beach, which is why you were inundated with those commercials. All right, let's do some palate cleansing here, some purging with electricity. Enjoy.
This is a story about electricity. Not the whole story, but what David Greger learned when he tried out his new plastic flashlight. Just then, his sister Marilyn came to his room, wondering why her comb was giving her so much trouble. It seemed to stick to her hair, picking up the ends. What David heard reminded him of a sound he had often heard during summer thunderstorms. And it reminded him of how when he scuffed his feet on the rug and then touched metal, a spark jumped. These are all examples of what we call static electricity. Marilyn tried to wipe off her comb, but look, it picked up tiny pieces of paper. But static electricity doesn't last long enough to do any work. To light a bulb, we must have a flow of current electricity. Anyone can make current electricity in a chemical cell, say out of zinc and copper. When these metals are placed in water and soda, we have one form of wet cell. With an electric voltmeter, David showed her the electricity that is made. It's the same kind of electricity that's made in a flashlight cell. This is what you might call electricity in a package. This flashlight dry cell has a higher voltage than David's little copper zinc cell. It has enough to light a tiny one-cell flashlight bulb. And that's how a flashlight works. The electricity flows in a circuit or path from the batteries, through the bulb, through this metal strip inside, and back through the batteries. But electricity flows only when the circuit is complete. Marilyn wanted to know how they make electricity for the house. David said he thought it was made with magnets. And by now, they both had many questions about electricity. And so the next Saturday, they took their questions to the local power station. Electricity is the movement of electrons. Now, this was the first thing they learned from Mr. Gibbons, the engineer at the power station. But now, what is an electron? A tiny negative particle, Mr. Gibbons explained. An electron is so tiny that a piece of wire only 1 inch long can hold more electrons than there are drops of water in all the oceans of the earth. Think of that. Now, when David scuffed his feet across the rug, he actually scraped electrons off the rug onto his shoes. He became charged with electricity. Of course, you can't see electrons, not on your shoes nor even through a microscope. They're the tiniest things we know about. These electrons will jump off the first chance they get, as when David touched the radiator. David figured that Marilyn's comb must have scraped electrons from her hair and from her skirt. But why did the comb pick up the bits of paper? Mr. Gibbons told them that these electrons, or negative particles, are always trying to get together with positive particles. Now, we usually say it this way: unlike particles attract each other. So, when the comb got to be negative, it attracted the positive paper. Now, David recalled hearing that like particles push each other away or repel each other. Marilyn wanted to know what all this had to do with the wet cell that David made with the strips of copper and zinc. So Mr. Gibbons explained. The chemical action of the soda water causes the copper to give off electrons. These replace electrons which are attracted to the zinc. Then, said David, if there's a complete path, the electrons flow through the wire and through the meter and back to the copper. And if the circuit is broken, the electrons pile up there. They repel the other electrons behind, and the flow stops. Yes, David caught on quickly concerning the movement of electrons, and why circuits must be complete for current to flow. Now Mr. Gibbons asked whether they knew the difference between a conductor and an insulator. Marilyn said that copper wire is a conductor. It will carry electricity, but glass will not. How can we test what materials are conductors? We use a battery, a meter, and 2 wires in a tester, like this. The needle swings if the material conducts electricity and stands still if it does not. The plastic handle is an insulator. David was thinking about making a tester at home when the magnet reminded him, is the electricity in their home really made with magnets? Well, a long time ago, people found out that a magnet makes iron filings move into a pattern. Like this. This shows that around the magnet there are lines of force. And then, about 100 years ago, a man named Faraday discovered that a wire passed across these lines of force generated a small amount of electricity. In other words, electricity can come from magnetism. Not long after, another scientist discovered an effect when electricity is passed through a wire. This produces the same sort of lines of force as a magnet does, proving further connection that magnetism can be made with electricity. A coil of many turns of wire makes many magnetic lines of force, and a soft iron core in the loop makes the magnetism even stronger. In fact, the soft iron core becomes an electromagnet as long as the current flows. If it stops for a moment, the electromagnet drops the filings. When the electromagnet's lines of force are cut by a coil of wire, a much stronger current is generated. Then Mr. Gibbons brought out a small magneto generator, and it was fun to see electricity actually being generated. David looked at the magnets and at the coil of wire which passes through the lines of force when turned. Now this is the principle of the generators that supply the city with electricity. In the powerhouse, the enclosed generators are turned by steam turbines. In some parts of the country, great dams hold back huge quantities of water and release it to turn water turbines which drive the generators. From generating stations, current is sent out to factories, offices, stores, and homes. This electricity, as we have seen, is related to the static electricity, the comb made in Marilyn's hair, and to the current electricity made in David's copper zinc cell. Tremendous amounts of electricity for our everyday uses are made by passing wires through magnetic lines of force, as in the powerhouse where Mr. Gibbons has been so helpful. At home, they both continued with their new adventure in electricity. David started building a tester to find out more about many conductors and insulators. Marilyn began making a scrapbook, planning to put in pictures showing how we use electricity in our homes. Of course, this was only a beginning, because with electricity being used for more things every day, there's always something new and fascinating to learn about it. For instance, you might find it interesting to learn how many different ways electricity has been used in making this motion picture.
Of Holy Mountain by Jodorowsky. I won't say any more about that. If you haven't seen it, it's a radical departure. It does not talk really about electricity, but it does have that final scene. All right, so behind me I have a film scanner set up, and I've been asked by Encyclopedia Britannica to see if I can track down a good copy of a couple of their films for something that they're working on. So you get to help me watch and see. So this is Lady or the Tiger. Enjoy.
In the very olden time, there lived a semi-barbaric king, whose ideas, though somewhat polished and sharpened by the progressiveness of distant neighbors, were still large, florid, and as became the half of him which was barbaric. When every member of his domestic and political systems moved smoothly in its appointed course, his nature was bland and genial. But whenever there was a little hitch, he was blander and more genial still. For nothing pleased him so much as to make the crooked straight and to crush down uneven places. Among the borrowed notions by which the king's barbarism had become diluted was that of the public arena, in which the minds of his subjects were refined and cultured. This vast amphitheater was an agent of poetic justice, in which crime was punished or virtue rewarded by the decrees of an impartial and incorruptible chance. When a subject was accused of a crime of sufficient importance, notice was given that on an appointed the accused person would be decided in the king's arena. When all the people had assembled in the galleries, and the king, surrounded by his court, sat high up on his throne of royal state, he gave a signal.
Now.
And the accused subject stepped out into the amphitheater. Directly opposite the accused, on the other side of the enclosed space, were two doors. It was the duty and privilege of the person on trial to walk directly to these doors and open one of them. He could open either door he pleased. He was subject to no guidance or influence but that of the aforementioned impartial and incorruptible chance. If the accused opened the one door, there came out of it a hungry tiger, the fiercest and most cruel that could be procured, which immediately tore him to pieces as a punishment for his guilt. The moment that the case of the criminal was thus decided, doleful bells were clanged, great wails went up from hired mourners, and the vast audience with downcast hearts wended slowly their homeward way, mourning greatly that one so young and fair or so old and respected should have merited so dire a fate. But if the accused person opened the other door, there came forth from it a lady, the most suitable to his years and station that His Majesty could select from among his fair subjects. And to this lady the accused was immediately married as a reward of his innocence. The exercises, as in the other instance, took place immediately. This was the king's semi-barbaric method of administering justice. Its perfect fairness is obvious. On some occasions, the tiger came out of one door, and on some, out of the other. The criminal could open either door he pleased. The whole matter was in his own hands. Thus, the masses were entertained and pleased, and the thinking part of the community could bring no charge of unfairness against the king's justice. This semi-barbaric king had a daughter, as blooming as his most florid fancies. Among the king's court was a young man of that fineness of blood and lowness of station common to the conventional heroes of romance who love royal maidens. This royal maiden was well satisfied with her lover, for he was handsome and brave to a degree unsurpassed in all the kingdom, and she loved him with an ardor that had enough of barbarism in it to make it exceedingly warm and strong. This love affair moved on happily for many months, until one day the king happened to discover its existence. He did not hesitate nor waver in regard to his duty. The youth was immediately cast into prison, and a day was appointed for his trial in the king's arena. The tiger cages of the kingdom were searched for the most savage and relentless beasts, from which the fiercest monster might be selected. And the ranks of maiden youth and beauty throughout the land were carefully surveyed by competent judges, in order that the young man might have a fitting bride, in case fate did not determine for him a different destiny. Of course, everybody knew that the deed with which the accused was charged had been done. He had loved the princess, and neither he, she, nor anyone else thought of denying it. But the king would not think of allowing any fact of this kind to interfere with the workings of the tribunal. No matter how the affair turned out, the king would take an aesthetic pleasure in watching the course of events which would determine whether or not the young man had done wrong in allowing himself to love the princess.
Thank you.
The appointed day arrived. From far and near the people gathered and thronged the great galleries of the arena. The king and his court were in their places, opposite the twin doors, those fateful portals so terrible in their similarity. All was ready. The signal was given.
Now.
Half the audience had not known that so grand a youth had lived among them. No wonder the princess loved him. What a terrible thing for him to be there. Following custom, the youth bowed to the king, but he was not thinking at all of that royal personage. From the moment that the decree had gone forth that her lover should decide his fate in the king's arena, the princess had thought of nothing but this great event and the various subjects connected with it. Possessed of more power, influence, and force of character than anyone who had ever before been interested in such a case, she had done what no other person had done. She had possessed herself of the secret of the doors. Gold and the power of a woman's will had brought secret to the princess. She knew in which of the two rooms that lay behind the doors stood the open cage of the tiger, and in which waited the lady. And not only did she know that, but she also knew who the lady was. It was one of the fairest and loveliest maidens of the court, who had been selected as the reward of the accused youth, should he be proved innocent of the crime of aspiring to one so far above him. And the princess hated her. Often she had seen this fair creature throwing glances of admiration upon the person of her lover, and sometimes she thought those glances were perceived. Now and then she had seen them talking together. It was but for a moment or two, but much can be said in a brief space. The girl had dared to raise her eyes to the loved one of the princess. And with all the intensity of her savage blood, the princess hated the woman who waited behind that silent door. How often she had started in wild horror as she thought of her lover opening the door behind which waited the cruel fangs of the tiger. But how much oftener she had seen him at the other door. And yet, that awful tiger, those shrieks, that blood. When the accused looked at the princess and his eyes met hers, he saw by that quick power of perception which is given to those whose souls are one, that she knew behind which door crouched the tiger and behind which stood the lady. He had expected her to know it.
Which one?
Now, the point of the story is this. Did the tiger come out of that door, or did the lady?
So that film was a little beat up. I don't know if you saw the like on this side of the screen there was kind of that greenish. That was perf fix, which is a tape that goes over the little perfs that get torn in a projector when someone hasn't threaded a projector correctly. And so, of course, it was at the beginning where a teacher did not thread it correctly, and it was at the end where a teacher also tried to rewind it back through the projector when you're not supposed to do that. So, let's see if I have a better copy of that. Taryn, I'm very sorry to hear about the electrical fire that you experienced. Let us know how we can help. We got a great community here of people who maybe we can figure out some way to help. In the meantime, let's go to some other place. Let's go to the Sahara. Enjoy.
This is the desert, a vast dry sea of barren plains, sand, and rugged mountains. A region which seldom knows rain and where few men or plants can live. All the continents have deserts, but the greatest of all is found in Africa, the Sahara Desert, a thinly settled wasteland. It is larger than the United States of America, yet in this vast Sahara, only about 3 million people live, fewer than in some large cities of Europe or the Americas. Over most of the Sahara, so little rain falls that only the hardiest of plants can survive. And in its heart, several years may pass between short cloudbursts. The Sahara has mountain ranges where peaks rise to a height of nearly 11,000 feet. And salty plains where distant layers of heated air reflect the sky in a mirage. Barren sands may reach for hundreds of miles with dunes 500 feet high. A rolling sea of sand where desert winds blow the constantly shifting ways, where nothing green can grow, and where neither man nor animal can live for long. In modern times, man has built railways along the edge of the Sahara, but the trains are small, and these rail lines reach into the desert only a few hundred miles. Beyond the rails are roads, some of which go completely across the Sahara, but such roads are poor, and in some places, piles of rock are needed to help mark the route. At emergency stations, water and gasoline are available for passing cars, and cargo trucks carrying supplies to the few lonely towns of the desert. Airplanes, too, are helping conquer the Sahara, carrying passengers and cargoes swiftly over dunes and mountains, covering in hours a distance that would take many days by train or auto, and many months on foot or camel. But the one local airline reaches only a few of the main desert cities, and even they are very small, merely a few hundred houses where 4,000 or 5,000 persons may live, mainly Arabs, Berbers, and Negroes of the Mohammedan faith. At such cities, there's usually a stream supplying farms and a palm grove. But still, in this barren land, wood is precious, and most houses are made of earth. The clay near a water hole is mixed with sand and patted into cakes. In drying, these cakes harden into bricks, which can be built into walls and smoothed over with plaster. Thick earth walls, whitened to reflect the sun, hold out the heat and make such desert dwellings comfortable. Overhanging rooms often change a street into a tunnel, but what is lost in light and air is gained in escape from the sun. Within such cities, tiny donkeys easily carry loads that would seem as heavy as the donkey itself. In the market square, these men are making leather slippers. Nearby, desert farm products are exchanged for goods from other areas. Dates and grains from local farms are traded for spices from Central Africa, sheep and goats from northern mountains, or metalware and clothing from Europe. Such goods are brought by the trains, trucks, and planes. Without them, the desert cities would have a much more primitive life and far less security. But away from these cities are millions of square miles of desert in which live many thousands of persons. To reach such remote areas, man must use the only beast of burden which can live well in the desert, the camel. A camel's wide, flat feet do not sink into desert sand. It can eat hay or straw, but can live equally well on desert grasses, and its nostrils can be closed against blowing sands. Though ugly, ill-tempered, and hard to train, a camel is the most valuable animal in the desert. It can travel 5 or 6 days without water, under conditions which would soon kill a horse or an ox. A camel can cover 50 miles a day with a rider or a load of 500 pounds. Camel caravans are still the only means of carrying food and supplies to distant tribes in the remote wastes of sand and mountains. At the foot of mountain slopes, where occasional rains collect, there are sometimes grassy plains where goats or sheep can graze. But these thin grasses are soon eaten, and the flock must move on, perhaps many miles, to find another pasture. Those who tend such wandering flocks are called nomads, people with no permanent homes. A small caravan of camels may carry a family of nomads and all their belongings. Here, enough grass has been found to give a few days' grazing to the lean nomad flocks. So camp is made. A nomad tent is a strange house, but an extremely practical one for the desert. The dwelling must often be moved, and this tent can be rolled up and carried on the back of a camel. The coarsely woven material helps keep out blowing desert sands, and being low and rounded, the tent offers little resistance to strong desert winds. The family's water bags are hung on a pole tripod. Coffee is ground with a brass mortar and pestle. But aside from this, the nomad's cooking equipment is limited to a few battered pots and pans, wooden bowls for mixing food. Wool from the flocks is carded between wooden paddles, in which hundreds of projecting nails comb the raw wool into parallel strands. These fibers are twisted to form a rude cord and are attached to a wooden bobbin. Spinning the bobbin tightens the woolen strands into yarn, which may be woven into blankets, tents, or clothing. The wealth of the nomad is in his flocks and the meat and wool which they produce. Scattered widely through the desert are springs or groups of wells. Such a water source is called an oasis, and here men can live, cultivate fields, and build a village. An oasis can become a lush garden in a desert waste, with a profusion of vegetables, grains, fruits, and flowers. An important oasis crop is grain. It is harvested by hand and may be threshed by camels walking on the grain, the pressure of their feet squeezing the kernels of the grain from their husks. At such an oasis market as this, passing nomad tribes may stop to trade meat and woolens from their flocks for the fruits or grains of oasis farms. The palm tree is very important in the desert, and men have come to depend upon it for many things. In summer temperatures which may reach 130 degrees, a palm grove may be the only shade within many miles. Sahara dwellers have no coal, gas, or oil for fuel, but again the palm provides. Dead leaves are carefully gathered for fires. Without the palm, this man would have difficulty finding fuel for cooking. And without a palm's logs for rafters and palm leaves for covering, his mud house would be without a roof. Date palms even supply food. Among their leaves are clusters of flowers, to which boys climb carrying the blossoms of other date palms. They sprinkle the pollen from the blossoms on this tree's flowers, which are then tied into bunches to hold the pollen. Natural pollination would produce a few dates, but to ensure a heavy crop, this additional hand pollination is necessary. In a few months, the seeds ripen into rich clusters of fruit. In this hot land, where there is neither ice nor electricity for refrigeration, very few foods can be stored, but energy-giving dates can be dried and kept indefinitely without refrigeration. Next to the farms of this oasis is a small gathering of mud houses. The number which can live in such a village depends upon the amount of food which can be raised on the nearby farms. For although an oasis may seem a pleasant place to live, even here man has a constant struggle with nature, the fight for water. The palms providing fuel and shelter, the food he eats, the water he needs to drink, his whole existence may depend upon the slender thread of a tiny stream or well which may dry up and take life with it. The source of such waters may be rainfall on mountain slopes hundreds of miles away. Such waters, seeping deep underground, may rise to the surface in a tiny spring, running as a stream for a few miles, then soaking into the desert, disappearing again. In other zones, water comes from deep artesian wells, forced to the surface by underground pressure. In some wells, fine sand may filter through spaces in the rock walls, collecting at the bottom. In time, this will stop the flow of water. The dangerous task of keeping such wells free of clogging sand falls to these brave well divers. Entering the well, a diver holds onto a guide rope which leads to the bottom. Then, understanding the hazards of such diving, says a lengthy prayer. An assistant brushes the flies away so they will not disturb the diver. Now ready, the diver fills his lungs and pulls himself to the bottom by means of the guide rope. Seconds lengthen into 3 long minutes before there's a swirl in the water and the exhausted man reappears, gasping for air. Assistants rub his shoulders to restore circulation. And the diver returns to a fire of palm branches to warm after the chilling depth. Now helpers pull a crude rope from the well. More and more rope appears until 100 feet of it has risen. And then at the rope's end, a tiny sand-filled basket comes to the surface, filled by the bare hands of the diver in the cold and dark pressure of 100-foot depth. Such men bravely risk their lives many times a day to keep these wells free from clogging sand so that precious water will continue to flow. Whether from clear artesian wells or from slime-covered pools in the Sahara, water is life. Water, spreading across the thirsty desert, can raise crops and make this oasis green and habitable. But without water holes and oases, this would be a barren land where man could not live. The Sahara is the world's greatest desert. Man has crossed this wasteland with roads and rails. Planes and trucks carry goods to cities where thousands of men live, 1,000 miles from what we call civilization. Yet in spite of man's science and effort, there remains the greatest part of the Sahara which few men know, where rolling dunes block man's advance, where only a lonely caravan can cross a rocky plain, where human life depends upon a hidden well, or where a seeping pool of water gives life to an oasis, which stands like an island in a sea of sand. The people of the Sahara have a hard and uncertain life, where a whim of nature may take their water source, blot out their farms, and so their existence. Only men like these really understand the problems of life in the Sahara Desert.
That film just wouldn't end. I was like, all right, wrap it up, we get it. Yeah. All right, one last film. This is going to go a little long, but I feel like it's a really great palate cleanser for whatever's going on in your life, or if you still have Hardy's jingles going through your head. This is a great way to get them out. This is Legend of the Raven. Enjoy.
The Eskimo since earliest times for magical reasons or simply for amusement. Today, the Eskimos still create objects of such beauty that they are often held in the hand for pure enjoyment of shape and texture. Like their art, the legends of the Eskimos are simple interpretations of the spirit world and the elements of nature which surround them. This film, through the medium of carvings, tells such a story, passed down through generations and enriched by Eskimo songs and poetry, and the music of the drum dance.
The darkness goes on for months in the Arctic winter. The wind never stops, and the snow keeps on drifting.
Ada siang unikala oktigun.
Asa unikah to siya nangin nama.
Unikah ya kedua gabe.
Tudugang mi. Atay ni. Bisa ini. Dahil cuma nialuk upang kami.
Once, long ago, as sometimes happens in early spring, there was a hungry time for the people. The migration of the caribou had not come. We ourselves have waited long for the caribou some years, but never as long as that. All the people were hungry, and so a man and his son left home and went in search of food. Fear was about them, and remaining was intolerable. At last they saw a raven sitting on the barrier ice. In those days, of course, all ravens were able to speak like men. Raven, have you seen any animals we could eat? No, I'm starving myself. Just now I was dreaming of dead fish. You are higher than we are. Raven, you are a good hunter. Will you tell us if you find any game? I will. After he had flown for a long time, thinking how hungry he was, the raven saw some walrus lying on the floe ice. In the past, the raven had teased Ivik because he was clumsy. Now the walrus teased him. The raven flew on and spied Teriak the weasel. But he is the quickest of all animals, and when the raven swooped, Teriak only laughed. At last, down on tundra, the raven saw something he could eat. It was the eggs of Opik, the owl. Perhaps Opik would be generous. The raven could only think of how good those eggs would taste. I am so happy to see you, Opik. Are you not happier to see my eggs? Could you spare me one egg? Try and take one. Just one egg. The raven was hungrier than ever. He saw Nanook the bear watching for seal by a crack in the sea ice, for he too was hungry.
Hey, Nanook!
Have you no sense? The seal will hear you. A long way off, the man and the boy who had found no game were fishing through a hole in the sea ice. For a long time they bent over the water, hoping for a bite. They caught nothing. How they wished for even a sculpin or a rock cod to catch the hook. But the sculpin laughed at them. The water was dark and still, and there was no tug on the line. They were weak with hunger, but there was no help for it.
There was nothing but ice around them. Night came on. They were tired of watching and waiting. The father sang magic words to call up game. Seal, you are in my thoughts. Come up from the sea. Caribou, come in your herds in the dear early morning. Beasts of the plain, come and offer yourselves. Beasts of the sea, come and offer yourselves. Come and offer yourselves in the morning. But there was no answer to his songs. Meanwhile, far away through it, the raven flew on. Though he had seen much game for men, he had seen none for himself. He saw more walrus, but this time he did not speak. He saw Pemukto, the otter, who was hunting too, and Opik gliding silently, hunting in the darkness of the moon. When dawn came, he saw 4 snow geese beyond the edge of the floe ice. He knew that spring was coming back. Then he saw a wolf hunting. It followed fresh caribou tracks. At last the caribou had come. The raven must fly back with the news. When men hunt caribou, ravens eat well. Now at this time the hunters, who had found no game, were returning to camp. We are starving. Our stomachs are shrunken. We are so weak that we see the skin boats rise up out of their moorings. It is indeed a time of starvation. Earth itself hovers loose in the air. We are bewitched by Tonuk, the small spirit. But look, the raven has come back. The raven who was hunting for game for us.
Cheer up! I have seen game!
Where is it? What kind of game? Tell us, where is it? Where is the game and what kind is it? The raven told them of caribou, walrus, bear, and seal. Just then, something caught his eye. It was Nauya, the seagull, with a fish in her mouth. She was not hungry. Perhaps Nauya has some eggs nearby. Now everyone knows that the seagull is kind and generous. Perhaps she will give him an egg. Dear seagull, I have not eaten for days. Please let me have one of your eggs. Won't you give me just one of your eggs? No, said the seagull. And she repeated, no, you wouldn't let me die, would you, dear seagull? Well, to save your life, you may have one egg. At the thought of the eggs, the raven became greedy. He saw 2 skin buckets left lying on the shore by a careless girl, and he flew down to pick them up. The hunter and his son came up to him. Raven, where's the game you saw? And he answered, far from here. What did you see that we might catch? The caribou are coming. Tell us where we will go hunt them.
First, I will get my own food, then I will tell you. And the raven took one egg. The seagull was happy to save the raven's life. He took a second egg. Raven, spare my children. But Raven was greedy. All the birds protested. Raven, where is the game for us? But with the egg in his mouth, he could only answer. Even without the egg in his beak, Raven could not speak. Because of his greediness, the raven could no longer speak with men. Ever since that day, the seagull has carefully guarded her eggs. And ever since that day, all ravens have been cast out by the birds and can no longer speak like men.
Oil company. Oh boy. Anyways, fascinating nonetheless. Excuse me. I love folk tales like that, and the Inuit word games that you were hearing. Those were also awesome, and kind of a great way to usher in an early afternoon here at AV Geeks. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Thank you for the donation, Jeremy. We'll be back again tomorrow. It's Wednesday, right? And we'll be watching more 16mm films, because that's what we do. If you like what you saw, you can hit the thumbs up button. That's a great way to show that you like what we do, and it somehow adds up in some sort of weird thumbs up bank account, which will determine whether or not we live or die by the AI YouTube machines that will be going through and determining our value in the world. So please, thumbs up. You can also subscribe, and you can donate via the Super Thanks button, which Jeremy did. You can go to ko-fi.com/avgeeks to donate some coffee, or patreon.com/avgeeks. There's a ways to support us as well. Yeah. Everybody have a great rest of your day, and we will see you tomorrow. Taryn, take care. I hope that this is just an inconvenience and not something that's worse. Everybody take care.